Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this week's edition of the Trumpet on Greenwood, coming to you live from the original Black Wall Street radio station, live on the historic grounds of our nation's original Black Wall Street here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm your host, student in the ministry, Alvin Muhammad. And again, thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of the Trumpet on Greenwood. Let me begin by saying that I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and further bear witness that Minister Louis Farrakhan is indeed the divine reminder in our midst. I greet you, listening audience, in the greeting words of peace and paradise. Assalamu alaikum. Today's subject is the 3 C's of colonization. The 3 C's of colonization. I was listening to a video by our brother T.W. Shannon, who is on the Republican ticket for Lieutenant Governor of Oklahoma. It appears that the Republican Party has him slated to be the first black lieutenant governor in Oklahoma. You know, we have had our first black school superintendent, male and female, here in Tulsa. We have had our first black police chief in Tulsa, our first black mayor in Tulsa, and now it appears that we will have our first black lieutenant governor in Oklahoma. And of course, we've had our first black president since emancipation. They give us all these first to keep us pacified as mental and physical slaves, and black students still come in dead last in Oklahoma and across the nation in education. What good is being first if our children remain last? But I was listening to Mr. Shannon, and he said that we have to get back. These are his words. He said, we have to get back to that which made America great to start with. And there are 3 things that made America great that he refers to as the 3 C's. Number 1, the Constitution. The second is capitalism, our free market. And the third and most important, he said, was Christianity and the Christian values that have separated us from the rest of the world. When I heard my brother say these words, I was compelled to ask him, who is we? You know, who is us? It's like Malcolm X said that the slave would say when the slave master was sick, the slave would say, we sick, boss? I made comments in his post on this particular video, and I asked, bruh, who is we? We black people were made slaves under Christianity and the other 2 C's that you speak about. The Native Americans were practically wiped out under Christianity and the other 2 C's that you speak about. The Constitution labeled black as 3/5 human beings. Black, were the capital in capitalism, and Christianity then and now uses a white image of a black man named Jesus to promote white supremacy. What was so good about that for our ancestors and the Native Americans? His response was so embarrassing to the black suffrage made here in America that it made me think, what good is having a first black anything when the black person's thinking is the same as the white people who enslaved and beat us 400 years ago? So I wanted to come on today and talk about the 3 C's of colonization. Not that made America great, but the 3 C's of colonization: Christianity, the Constitution, and capitalism. Christians, particularly white Christians, conveniently forget how brutal and barbaric Christianity was and is in North and Central America. Constantine had a vision of a symbol, the cross. And he said, with this cross, I will conquer. And using that same symbol, the cross, the Christians brutally slaughtered thousands of tribes of Native Americans, wiping out many of them totally. Native Americans who welcomed the European immigrants and saved them from sure death were repaid with poisonous blankets infected with smallpox. And the most heinous acts of brutality and murder were committed against them by Christians. Christians used the cross and the ancient teachings of Christ Jesus to deceive the Africans. In fact, one of the many slave ships that Christians possessed was a slave ship called Jesus that they used to get us to their so-called promised land. But as the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan stated, as soon as they got us out of port, they took down the cross and put up the skull and crossbones. That was so because they were pirates, thieves, and murderers. This is why they teach today, or try to teach today, through critical race theory, that our ancestors were immigrants instead of slaves, because they lied to our ancestors to get them on their ships with promises of great fortune. But once they got us out to open waters, they introduced us to whips and shackles and the misfortune of being slaves. Mr. T.W. Shannon stated that Christian values set us apart from the rest of the world. This is absolutely true. Yes, they did. Through the process of segregation in the church and in society, white supremacy set us apart from white society for some 300 years in chattel slavery and over another 130 years as free slaves in Christian America. Christians gave the slave a slave Bible, that they groomed the slave in the way of servitude, not to God, but to the white slave masters who made themselves God besides gods to the slaves they stole and brought here to America. Jesus said in John 8:32, then ye shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. But the Christians of this nation hid the truth from black people and kept us in bondage for over 300 years, denying us freedom, justice, and equality. Henry Berry, a Christian delegate of the great state of Virginia in 1832 said, and he was not talking about us, Mr. T.W. Shannon. He said, we have as far as possible closed every avenue by which light may enter the slave's mind. And if we, again, Mr. Shannon, he was not talking about black people. He said, and if we could extinguish their capacity to see the light, our work would be complete. And they, meaning black people, would then be on the level of beast. And we, meaning white people, would be safe. I'm trying to make it as plain as possible to those of us who think like Mr. Shannon that when white people said we the people, they did not mean black people who were considered property in America. Moving on to the next C, capitalism. The first one being Christianity, the second one, capitalism. As I told Mr. T.W. Shannon, black people were the capital in this capitalistic Christian world. Mr. T.W. Shannon stated that capitalism was a radical idea in America based on the idea that free markets and not a socialist government should drive a nation. Capitalism is defined as an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit. A socialist government is a system where the state or community owns the means of production. Black people were the means of production for cotton, tobacco, sugar cane, rice, indigo. Black bodies were used and controlled by a community of white men as well as a government that used slave labor to build federal projects like the White House and the Capitol, as well as military installations here in America. So while the white population benefited from capitalism, controlling the market of free slave labor, the slaves suffered under a socialist government as the means of production, owned by a community/nation of white men that kept us apart from their social equality. Can you imagine working a 30-hour week and not getting paid? Well, imagine working 300 years without pay, because that's exactly what our ancestors did here in America, building up this great land of the free. This is why the 1968 Kerner Commission report warned that, quote, our nation is moving towards two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. But in truth, the Kerner report got it wrong by saying we are moving towards two societies. America has always been two societies, one for white people and another for black people, brutally controlled by white people. The Kerner Commission report was completed 180 years after the ratification of the Constitution of the United States, which was June 21st, 1788. The Constitution is the supreme law of the United States of America, guaranteeing citizens fundamental rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is the supreme law, which means it is a law higher than, or should be a law higher than, white supremacy. It is a law higher than Jim Crow laws, a law higher than the Black Code laws, a law higher than the disenfranchisement laws or poll taxes, a law higher than the redlining laws, and also a law higher than the blue code of the police force. At least it's supposed to be. That's what they sell us on. But even though the Constitution is supposed to be the highest, the supreme law in America, Jim Crow, white supremacy, black codes, redlining, disenfranchisement codes or laws, and the blue code of the police force all act superior to the supreme law when it comes to black people in America. 56 years after the Kerner report and 236 years after the Constitution was ratified, which guaranteed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we have the latest race and equity report completed in 2024 of April. The report highlighted persistent disparities in education, health, and wealth. And of the 89 countries observed in 2024, America ranks number 55 in equality. Yet we have this Constitution that begins with the preamble that reads, quote, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Now, again, the Constitution was ratified in 1788, but the slaves was not emancipated until 1863, 75 years later. When the Constitution was ratified, the slave was not considered part of the people of the United States. We were considered property of the people of the United States. In fact, Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution reads, the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all the privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. Well, if we know history, then we know the slave did not have rights and privileges on the plantation. Not to think of having rights and privileges if we happen to wander off the plantation like Harriet Tubman did, as well as a few others. If we left the plantation, we did not have a Democratic or Republican delegation pursuing us to give us our rights. We had a delegation of dogs and slave catchers seeking to deprive us of human rights. So it should be clear that we the people did not mean black people enslaved in America. 2 years after being emancipated in 1863, an amendment was made to the Constitution, the 13th Amendment in 1865, that reads, quote, "Neither slavery or involuntary servitude except as punishment for crimes whereof the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist in the United States or any other place subject to their jurisdiction." The 14th Amendment, enacted in 1868, 3 years after blacks were emancipated, reads, quote, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce laws which shall abridge the privileges or immunity of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within the jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." This is what the Constitution states. Now, this is what is written, or was written in between 1863 and 1865 as it relates to the amendments. But what was practiced then and what is being practiced now when it comes to equality, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in America for black people? Throughout this document, it repeats the words, "Congress shall have the power to enforce this article. But if those who have the power to enforce what is written don't act to enforce it, then what good is the writing on the paper? It becomes nothing more than a pretty piece of paper being preserved in a very expensive case." The question we must ask is, has Congress acted to give us equality and the rights that the Constitution guarantees the citizens of this nation? T.W. Shannon stated that the Constitution was based on the idea that our rights did not come from government, but rather from God. The problem with the idea is that the government, America, the white man's government, to be more clear, made himself a God besides God as it relates to black people in America. As property, we did not have freedom of religion. We had forced religion. We did not have freedom to assemble unless it was to assemble to pick cotton from can't see morning to can't see night. We didn't have the privileges of the citizens of this nation. So in spite of the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery between 1865 and 1900, some 35 years, the black prison population experienced a rapid and disproportionate growth, particularly in the South, effectively functioning as a replacement for slavery through what is called the convict leasing system. The convict leasing system. The convict leasing system allows state officials to lease out black convicts to work for free in coal mines, on the railroads, and also back on plantations under continued brutal conditions. The 14th Amendment states, "No state shall enforce laws that abridge the privilege or immunity of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." That is what is written in the Constitution, but that did not prevent states from instituting new laws like the black codes and vagrancy laws that helped to boost the black prison population to produce a new state-run prison plantation system that helped build America. The Constitution says no citizen shall be deprived of property without due process. Yet, over the 20th century, or leading up to the 20th century, Black Americans were deprived of 12 to 13 million acres of farmland, representing a 90% loss of land stolen by white individuals and white institutional banking systems. Yet we have this Constitution that tells us that a citizen shall not be deprived of property. Somebody's perpetrating a fraud, as Minister Farrakhan says. Somebody is perpetrating a fraud. What Mr. Shannon, as well as many Black leaders in America, must come to understand is that the Constitution did not appear to apply to Black people well into the 20th century. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is what the Constitution guaranteed its citizens. So let us look at the situation today, 238 years after the Constitution was ratified, to see if we are victims of product fraud. Life expectancy is lowest in America among Native Americans and African Americans when compared to our white counterparts. And according to KFF, which is the leading health policy organization in the United States, the widening racial disparities in life expectancy are due to inequalities as well as barriers in accessing health care. 238 years after the Constitution was ratified, guaranteeing us the things, freedom, justice, and equality, and life. 238 years, and we're still suffering from these barriers. Liberty is defined as the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authorities on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. But according to a 2023 UC Berkeley report by Nadia Lathan, 50 years after being outlawed, redlining still drives neighborhoods and health inequalities, and discriminatory lending practices continue to have serious effect on Black and minority communities. 50 years. And we're still dealing with the same old things that we were fighting for during civil rights. The report goes on to say that even though redlining has been illegal since 1968, multiple studies show that redlining's harmful legacy has left non-white communities struggling with air pollution, reproductive health disorders, and fewer urban amenities for them 50 years later. 235 years after the Constitution was ratified in 1788, the guarantee of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is still being denied to Blacks and minorities here in the land of the free, home of the brave. We must ask ourselves, does it really take that long to implement the Constitution, or is there a superior law in effect that supersedes the Constitution? 186 years after the Constitution was ratified, guaranteeing us the right to the pursuit of happiness, we have the Equal Educational Opportunities Act of 1974, which prohibits states from denying equal education opportunities to children based on race, color, sex, or national origin. Yet, in 2026, 238 years after the Constitution was ratified, promising us the right to the pursuit of happiness, Black students in particular in the United States frequently record the lowest average scores in reading, math, and ACT benchmarks, a situation created by systemic issues like school funding inequalities, limited access to advanced coursework, and higher suspension rates. The children, our children, are our future, but persistent disparities within the nation's 100 largest school districts show that in most of all of them, Black students are performing below not at, but below the national average and are not on par with white students. Imagine that. Is this by design? Is there a law in effect that is superior in power than the Constitution that keeps blacks performing and advancing on a lower level than whites? I repeat the words of U.S. Senator Henry Berry, who said in 1832, listen, we have as far as possible closed every avenue by which light may enter the slave's mind. If we could extinguish the capacity to see the light, our work would be complete. The blacks would be on the level, or he said they, but he meant blacks, they would be on the level with the beast of the field, and we, meaning white people, should be safe. With the continued and persistent disparities that exist in our community in education and job opportunities, in spite of the guarantees of the Constitution, how are we treating each other today in our community? Would you say that we are treating each other as family or as beasts of the field like Senator Berry envisioned for us? According to a recent report in 2025, while overall U.S. homicides declined by over 20%, Black Americans continue to be disproportionately affected by gun violence, with 89% of Black firearm-related homicides committed by blacks. In other words, blacks killing blacks. For the last 50 years, data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics has shown that Black Americans consistently face higher unemployment rates that often double the rates of whites in America. Factors which cause this continued situation to be defined as discrimination. This is the situation today in spite of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was amended in 1972 with the Equal Employment Opportunities Act of 1972, which was law. This was a law. But in spite of these acts being made into law, and in spite of the fact that the Constitution was said to be the supreme law of the land, a superior law has been in play since the inception of the Constitution, and that law is the law of white supremacy. There is no law in America, none, that is superior to the law of white supremacy. The Constitution and every other law, including God's law of love, are subordinate to the law of white supremacy in America. This is why, with the Bible and the cross in tow, Europeans were able to come to America and nearly wipe out the Native Americans, slaughtering them in mass and displacing them from their land. This is why, with the Bible and the cross in tow, they were able to bring Africans here and brutally subjugate them in the most inhumane form of slavery known to man. It took 4 months for white men to draft the U.S. Constitution. 4 months, that's all it took, 4 months. And 238 years later, they can't draft legislation that gives blacks equal status under the law and Constitution here in America. Why is that? They just can't seem to figure out how to give blacks in America the same equal rights that whites enjoy in the area of employment, education, health, and life expectancy. As we celebrate Black history and the horrors of being black in America, let us reflect on the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "I fear I have led my people into a burning house." We want to keep hope alive, as our brother Jesse Jackson, or I should say our late brother Jesse Jackson, inspired us to do. But to keep our hopes in a system of white supremacy that continues to deny us equality is foolish. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches that we want freedom. We want full and complete freedom. We want justice, equal justice under the law. We want justice applied to all regardless of creed, class, or color. We want equality of opportunity. We want equal membership in society with the best of civilized society. But if America continues to deny blacks the full rights of the Constitution that they claim is the highest law of the land, then the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches we want our people in America whose parents or grandparents were descendants from slaves to be allowed to establish a separate state or territory of their own, either on this continent or elsewhere. He goes on to say, since we cannot get along with them in peace and equality after giving them 400 years of sweat and blood and receiving in return some of the worst treatment human beings have ever experienced, we believe our contributions to this land and the suffering forced upon us by white America justifies our demand for complete separation in a state or territory of our own. Post-Civil War, we had hundreds of black towns, but today we only have about 30 black towns in existence. Towns that we either abandoned by us seeking better life among white people in their communities, or cities or towns that were burned down by whites who hated the idea that blacks could survive without their control and support, like what happened here on the historic grounds of Greenwood. We literally had a little city for ourselves. We relied on ourselves for food, clothing, and shelter. And based upon a lie, rooted in a relationship between a black man and a white woman that infuriated white America and gave them an excuse to come into our community and burn down our community. Hundreds of towns have been victim of such rage of white people in America. But we had hundreds of towns pre-Civil War, hundreds of black towns where we relied on one another as a community. Towns that we abandoned again or that were burned down by those so sick with envy and jealousy that they burned them down. But knowing that we had that, why not repopulate these black towns with all of our education and wealth and produce an environment that provide us with freedom, justice, and equality? Why keep running and going where we are not accepted? The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, stop going where you're not wanted. They constantly show and tell us each day that they don't want us. So why not repopulate these black towns or produce black towns or a place for ourselves and separate and do something for ourselves where we can receive justice, life, equality of health, and produce that for ourselves. It only took them 4 months to produce the Constitution. Here we are 260 years later, and we still can't get justice in America. We have $2 trillion in spending power today. $2 trillion at our disposal, and yet we are still treated like undocumented immigrants here in America. We got all this money that we're spending buying their products, and yet we have no respect. We are not respected. We are not loved. We are not wanted in America with all this money. Why not separate and buy back black towns, produce black schools, and produce black jobs for us instead of keeping hope alive in a system that keeps our babies continually dying in the streets due to the injustice, inequality, and lack of liberty we suffer from here in America? We have been tricked into believing we are full citizens when history has and is proving us and providing us with the truth that we are not. In the words of Malcolm X, who said, we've been had, we've been took, we've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok. This is what those who cite the Constitution today have done to us. To hear my brother T.W. Shannon talking about we, again, they weren't talking about we. My brother's been bamboozled. We've been bamboozled to believe that when they were talking about we were included in the we. No, we were property in America. And they still look at us as property in America. Property that has money to spend on their products. Individuals who refuse to do something for themselves. But as the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan warns us today, we must do something for self or continue to suffer the consequences. And with that being said, brothers, I want to encourage you. Today is Savior's Day. We've been celebrating Savior's Day all week in Chicago. But today we have a keynote address, a message, a divine message that is going to be given to us by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So if you can, brothers, please tune in to NOI.org and listen live to this divine message from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. We must be awakened to the reality of the situation we live in America. We must be motivated to do something for self, or we will continue to suffer the consequences of injustice and inequality in America. Please tune in to NOI.org today at 2 o'clock. Right now, I'm finna turn off right now and go tune in myself and listen to this divine message from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of The Trumpet on Greenwood. Assalamu alaikum.